Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be exploring one of Django's most important features, and that is the Django ORM. If you use Django, then the ORM is one of the ways that make using Django easy. The Django ORM is a way through which you can be able to interact with your database and do things like basic CRUD. In this video, I'm going to be walking you through some more advanced concepts while using the Django Web Framework ORM. I hope you enjoy this video, and without further ado, let us get right into it. So to begin this video, I'm going to be showing you the simple database model that we have right here, which is a book database model. And this model has the following fields. It has the title of a book because the entity or the table that we are creating is one to store information about books. So each book has a title, it has an author, it has a description, it has a language, a page count, created at date, and updated at date. And we also have a string representation for whatever book object that we shall get. One thing we have also done is to go ahead and register this on the admin. So we have admin.site.register books, but we can customize it as far as we want. So I'm just choosing to just register it and have the default way it looks on the admin. Another thing we have done is to go ahead and register this app in which the books model is into our project installed apps list. So for now, we can go ahead and try to see what is on the admin. On the admin panel, I've created a list of books, and these books are information from a certain website of books. So I think my server is not running, but all I have to do is to go ahead and say Python 3 manage.py run server, and this will go ahead and run the server. So when the server is running, we shall notice when you go back to the admin that we already populated our database with information about books, so that we have some information to work with in this video. So I decided to just go ahead and do this so that we can be able to skip this entire step. So once we have that, then let's start by looking at how we can do basic queries with Django. So the most important concept when doing queries with Django is going to be the query set. And what a query set is just a group of objects that is returned whenever we query the database. Now to begin, we're going to go where we have our server running, and right here in my VS Code, I'll go ahead and open up a new terminal. And in this terminal, so I guess I have to put this to the left. So in our terminal right here, I'm going to begin by opening up the Django shell. So for me to do that, I'll run Python 3 manage.py and then shell. And once that is done, we are now going to go ahead and create our first query set. So right here in our shell, I'm going to start by accessing the simple database model that we've created in books models.py. So what I'm going to do is to say from the models that's inside our books. So you're going to say from books.models, we are going to go ahead and import the book model that we've created. So this book model. So I'm going to go ahead and say import book. And once we've imported book, we're going to create our first query set. So the first query set we're going to do is going to be called Q1. And this is going to be our first query set. This query set is going to be responsible for getting all books that are present within our database. We're not going to carry out any sort of ordering or any sort of filtering. All we're going to do is to go fetch all books and then return them in a query set of objects. So to do this, we're going to say Q1 is going to be equal to our book model. Then we're going to use our object manager, and then we shall call the all method. And what this is going to do is to create a query set of all the books that we have stored within our database. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and say enter. And when we call Q1, we shall now notice that this is returning the list of all books that we have within our database. So this is what a query set is. It's basically a list of objects that are returned on a specific query. Now we can also go ahead and do something more interesting with this query right here. So I'm going to clear my terminal with Ctrl and L, and then I'll go ahead and create another query set based on the query set that we've done. So to begin, I'm going to say Q2, and Q2 is now going to be built off Q1. So you can go ahead and also filter objects from a certain query set that we've initially had. So in this case, we're going to use Q1 and then we shall call the filter method. And what this does is to help you filter through a query set and return objects that match a certain criteria or a certain rule. So in this case, what we want to do is to go ahead and search for all the items that have the language of English. Now to go ahead and do that, I'll go ahead and say language, and in this case we shall say that we want to specify the language to be English. So this is going to return the query set of all our books and return all those books that have the language being English. So if we go ahead and say enter and call our Q2, in this case we're going to return a query set of items, and these are going to be objects that have the language being English. Now let's make this more interesting. What we have here is an unordered list, and in case we did not set up the default ordering of our books, which we can do via the meta class that we can use the ordering attribute on, we can also go ahead and do that by using the order by method on our query set. So what you can do is to say q2 dot order by, so sorry for this is going to be order by, and in this case we're going to order by the date at which we created these items. So we're going to order by the created at date. So this is one that's being stored every time we keep or each time we create an object of type book. So that's the whole purpose of the auto now add argument to the datetime field class. It helps us to just go ahead and save the item at the specific date that we went ahead and populated it. So in this case, if we go back to our terminal right here and say q2.orderBy, we want to specify the field that we want to use to order. So in this case, we shall say .orderBy created at, and this time let's call this q3. So in this case, we shall call this our query set number 3. And when we say q3, this is going to return our query set in the same way as we have it here. And this is because we have just kept it to the default order, which is the one for the ascending order. But in case we wanted to order this by minus date created or by one that was created the latest, then all we shall have to do is to go ahead and say that our q3 is going to be q2.orderBy, and in this case we shall specify that we want by the negative created at date. And what this is going to do is to order them by the first item being the one that was created latest and the last item being the one that was created earliest. So if we go ahead and enter and then call our q3, in this case we're going to see that our list is going to be ordered in another way. What was first in the previous section is going to be the last, and what was last is going to be the first. So it's going to order them by the date at which they were created, but it's going to order them in a more descending order. Django also allows for the use of the exclude method that helps us to filter out items that do not belong to the query set that we want. And let's look at how that does. So I'm going to create our next query set, which is going to be query set number 4. And this query set number 4 is going to exclude items that are going to match a certain criteria, or items that are going to be following a certain set of rules in their structure. So in this case, we are going to begin by getting our query 1. So in this case, we can say query 4 is going to be equal to the value of query 1. But let's try to exclude all items that have a certain rule. So for example, in this case, what you can do is to go ahead and say that our query 4 is going to be equal to query 1 dot exclude, and in this case we have to provide a rule for us to exclude. So in this case, let us try to use what is called a field lookup. So in Django, we can also go ahead and specify what we need to put inside a filter or exclude statement. And this is basically where all the details about the where statement in the SQL will go. So for example, if you wanted to select all items where the price is greater than a certain price, then this is where you will be able to do it. But it has an interesting way of helping you to do that. So for our example, what we're going to begin to do is by excluding an item that has a title that does not match a certain criteria or a certain rule. So for our case, what we're going to do is to specify the field. So our field is going to be title, just like you can see right here. Our books have a title, but when you go back to our admin, we can notice that these books have different titles. Now let's say I want to exclude the books that has the name Django in it. So for example, when you look through our examples of books right here, now let me make this a little bit bigger, we can only see one book that has the title of Django. So for us to go ahead and do exactly that, we shall go back here, and what we shall do is to use the syntax of that danda, and then we specify the field lookup. Now in this case, we want to say I contains, and we want to point to that specific phrase within the title which we want to filter out. Now in this case, our filter is going to be based off the word Django. So we want to get all books in query set 1 that do not have the word Django in their titles. If we press enter, and in this case we call Q4, we shall return a list of all books that have every other title except for that one book that has the title Django. Now to confirm whether the book has been returned, let us first of all find out the number of items that are found within our query set 1. So Django ships with it a special method that we can call on query set objects, and that is the count method. Now for us to confirm, we can say q1.count, and this is going to return the number of items that are present within our database, which is the query set 1, which is returning 10 items. But then for our query set 4, where we went ahead and excluded that one book that doesn't have the title of, that doesn't have Django in it. In this case, if we say q4.count, we shall notice that it's going to return 9 items instead of 10. And this is because in the query set Q4, we excluded that one book that has the title of Django, or the one book that has the title that has the word Django in it. Now let us look at other ways we can use field lookups. In this case, we can go ahead and create our query set 5, and query set 5 is going to be one to basically filter. So in this case, we're going to filter, and we shall filter by all books that have, let's say, the page count being greater than, let's say the page count is going to be greater than the, let's say that our page count is going to be greater than, let's say, 100. So to do that, we can use double underscore, and then in this case we can say greater than or equal to, and then we say 100. And what this is going to do is to return all books that have their page count greater than 100. So if we went ahead and confirmed, in this case we can say q5.count, and in this case it's going to return 8 books, meaning that 2 books have their page count less than 100. So this is basically how Django works. It helps you to play around with the query set and also be able to perform an action based on that specific query set. For example, we can also chain on this query set another filter. So we can say filter, and in this case we can also specify that we want to filter by that item that has its language being English. So if we go ahead and say language, in this case we shall go ahead and say language is going to be English, and when you say that, it's simply going to go ahead and return all books because all these books have their language being English. So that's how we can perform simple queries. We can also go ahead and count item objects, and we can also go ahead and basically do things such as field lookups and other interesting things. Alright, so before we begin, I would like to introduce one change that I've done on our book model class. So the book model class has a new field, which is the is bestseller field. And this is a Boolean field that has a default value of false. And I've also gone ahead to make that migration and also make it reflect in our database. In addition to that, what I've done is to go ahead and also add other books on top of the books that we have within our database. So we have now more books, and some of those are bestseller books while others are not. Now I'm going to introduce the first advanced concept, and that is going to be objects. So queue objects are ones that can allow us to filter items and do comparisons using logical operators. So logical operators include AND, NOT, and OR. And it's amazing how we can use the Django ORM to make filters based on logical operators such as AND, OR, and NOT. So let us look at a very simple example. So to begin, we're going to go back to our shell. So I'm going to say Python 3 money.py shell. And within our shell, we're going to create our Q1, which is basically going to be one to get all items from our database. So to do that, shall say book.objects.all, and this will return all books that we have within our database. Now I think I have a problem here because the book model is not yet imported. So I'll go ahead and import that. So I'll say from books.models, we are going to go ahead and get the book model, and I'll clear the terminal. And once we've been able to do that, then I'll call our Q1. So Q1 is going to simply return all the items as we've created them from our database. Let us look at how we can formulate a simple statement that makes use of queue objects. So to begin, we have to first of all import our queue class. So a queue class is found within the Django DB models. It's found within the Django DB models module, and to access it, you have to go ahead and say from Django. This is going to be from Django.db.models. We are going to go ahead and import our queue class. And once we've imported our queue class, now let's create our query set. Let's call it Q2. And our Q2 is going to be one to get our query set of Q1. And in this case, we're going to make use of the filter. So let's start by looking at the OR. So to formulate, let's say, a query set that has all books that have the language of English or the page number being greater than a certain amount, then this is where the queue object really shines. So for example, in case we wanted to get by that criteria, we can just simply create a queue object. And in this case, we have to pass in that specific item that should return true or false, or that specific rule that should return true or false. Now in this case, we want to search for one that has the language as English. So we're going to say language, or sorry for this. So this is going to be language, and our language in this case is going to be English. And in this case, we want to go ahead and use OR. So for us to use OR, we shall use this special pipe operator, and that is going to symbolize our OR. And once we go ahead and try to provide the next condition, so our next condition or rule is going to be one in which the page count, let's say our page count, did we call it the page count? Yes, we called it the page count. Now in this case, we are going to say the page count is, let's say, less than or equal to 100. In this case, if we say less than or equal to 100, have to specify that. And when you press enter, so it seemed like we made an error. We didn't close this quote, so I'll go ahead and fix that. So that is going to create for us Q2, which is going to be a query set of all books that have their language as English and also their page count less than or equal to 100. So if we go ahead and try to create another query set using queue objects, let us try one that is actually the opposite. So in this case, we can do something like, let's say Q2 is going to be equal to one where we exclude, let's say Q1 dot, let's say exclude. And in this case, we want to go ahead and exclude all items that have their language as English. Now note that an OR statement will return true when one of the statements is true. So in this case, all these books are in English, and therefore it will return true because of the truth of this one statement. So in this case, if we say language is equal to English, now we are excluding all books that have their language as English, or those books that have their page count being less than 100. So in this case, we say page count danda less than or equal to 100. Now let's close this, and when you press enter, now let's call this our Q3 so that we keep these objects different. So this query set is going to be Q3, and we can call Q3. This time we expect Q3 to have less items. So this is basically how we are dealing with OR statements, or this is how we are basically doing comparisons or using logical operations. And in this case, we're using the OR operation with Q objects. So the Q object is one that's going to formulate a truth value out of what criteria you've provided, and then by use of a logical operator such as the OR we've used, it will go ahead and use that operator on the other statement that you provide. In this case, what we've looked at is basically the use of the OR statement. But then let's go ahead and also formulate query sets based on our AND or NOT. So let's just actually do the AND. So for us to do the AND, what we shall do is to go ahead. So I'm going to clear my terminal. I'll create a query set called Q4, and Q4 in this case is going to be, let's say, Q1 dot filter, and in this case we shall create Q. So the first Q that we're going to have is going to be 1 to check if let's say a book is a bestseller and if it has a certain page count. Now let us begin by saying that we want to check is best seller. Sorry for this. So this is going to be is best seller, and in this case we want to check if bestseller is true. So this is going to return true, and in this case we shall have to provide a logical and in this case this is going to be Q. So for our Q is going to be page count, and our page count in this case is going to be, we shall use a field lookup to state whether it's greater than, let's say, greater than or equal to, let's say, 400. So we shall close this. So we have an invalid syntax. It seems like we are supposed to use, I don't know why I forgot and wrote 2 ampersand. So this is going to go ahead and return this query set where we are having all of these being truth values. Now, one thing you need to understand about the logical AND is that the logical AND does not allow for one of the statements being false. Whenever you're using a logical AND, you should not have any statement being false. That's if you want a truth result to be returned. And in our case, this query set is going to go ahead and return only those objects or those book objects in which we have the bestseller attribute being true, and where we have the page count being greater than 400. So I hope you've understood what I mean by that. If you go ahead and say Q4, in this case it's going to return only one book that follows that specific criteria. So in our case we have one book where the book is a bestseller and the page count of that book is greater than or equal to 400. So this is basically how Q objects work. They just allow you to be able to use logical statements like the AND, the OR, and the NOT to just be in position to query the specific objects you want to query. And this is one of the ways you can formulate really complex queries by using conditions, just like we've seen here. Now that we've looked at Q objects, let us also look at the concept of aggregation. So using query sets, we can also go ahead and try to perform calculations based on the fields that we have within our databases. So let's go ahead and look at how we can do that. So to begin, we're going to go ahead and access some of the classes that we can use to perform calculations on some fields that we have within our database tables. So to do that, we shall first of all go to django.db.models, and we shall import the following. We shall begin by importing average, and then we shall go ahead and import, let's say, max, and we can also go ahead and import let's say sum. So all these are classes that can perform actions on our database attributes and then return for us those values. So let us begin by first of all getting our query set of Q1 and then maybe returning the total of all the pages that are contained in all the books that we have on each of the objects of our database, or each book that is actually present within our database. So what I'm going to do is to say q1 dot, and in this case we shall use a special method called the aggregate method. It's called aggregate, not aggregate, so it's going to be aggregate. And in this case we shall call one of the methods that we've specified, and that one method is going to be one for finding out the sum of all the, let's say, the page counts. So if we say page count, in this case it's going to go ahead and return the sum of all the pages that are contained within our books. With this we can perform things like the average. So if we wanted to find out the average, then all we need to do is to go ahead and use the average class, and that will go ahead and return the average of all the page counts that we have within our database table for the specific books. We can also do things such as finding out the maximum amount of page numbers. So if we go ahead and say max page count, that will go ahead and return 1000, meaning that the book with the highest number of pages is going to have 1000 pages. And that is just how aggregation works. It helps us to perform multiple calculations onto our database fields, and this is very important in cases where you're dealing with calculations, and those calculations depending on the values that are stored within some database fields. Now that we've looked at Q objects and how they can allow us to use logical operators to make queries, then let us look at F expressions. So there may be situations in which you may want to do calculations on certain fields of your database, but you may want to access data from those specific fields. And this is where F expressions come in handy. They allow you to refer to a value of a field so that you can be able to use it for an update or a computation or any other thing that you may want to do on your data that is stored within your database. Let us look at a very simple example. So I've opened up a new shell right here, and within this shell I don't have most of the stuff I imported, though if I scroll I can get to see all the things that I did in the previous parts of the video. So I'm going to first of all begin by re-importing our book model. So I'll say from books.models, we are going to go ahead and access our book model. And once we've been able to do that, then I'll also import our F class that's going to help us to create these F expressions. So I'll say from Django.db.models, we are still going to go ahead and import our F class. So once we've been able to import our F class, let us look at a very simple example that may be helpful when using our F class or our F expressions. So imagine a scenario where we want to update the count or be able to increment a count or use a specific value that is a number to perform a calculation somewhere on a certain database field. In this case, let's say we want to do that for our page count. So we're going to begin by querying for a book object. So I'm just simply going to go ahead and use our book model to get, so I'll say objects.get, and in this case I'll get the book with the ID of 2. Once I get the ID of 2, that is going to return this book right here. So what we want to access is the page count of this book, and that is going to be our 200 pages. Now if we wanted to go ahead and update this, it's going to be as easy as saying book dot, in this case, page count, and then we shall increment it by saying plus equals, and then the amount of pages we want to go ahead and add. For us to see these changes take effect, all we have to do is to say book book.save, and then this will go ahead and save the result to our database. So in this case, if we said something like book.page count, in this case we shall get 210 because we have incremented this count in our database. But keep in mind that what is happening here is after getting our book object, we still have to load the data of that specific page count into our memory. So F expressions allow you to be able to push that to the database end so that Python doesn't have to handle that. And that is very useful because in a scenario where you're performing these calculations, it may be very important for the database to handle that instead of your Python side handling it. So let us look at another example where we're going to update the count of this specific book but using F expressions. So for us to update the count, all we have to go ahead is to access our book object, and then we shall say book dot page count. So in this case, we're going to access the page count or the current page count. But if we want to access the current page count and then increment it, this time we shall use an F expression. Now, the way you do that is by providing F and then create an instance of the F class, and then providing that specific title or that specific field you want to go ahead and access. In our case, it's going to be our page count. So once we've imported our page count, now let's say I wanted to go ahead and subtract the 10 pages that we added onto our page count. In this case, we can go ahead and say minus 10, and this will go ahead and update this to the page count that we had before. If we want to go ahead and access our page count, this time we shall do something like book.save, and then when you try to access our book page count, we shall say book.page count. Now, one thing you'll notice here is instead of returning the book page count, it's going to return a combined expression object. So this means that we shall have to go ahead and requery the item for us to be able to see the updated values on our specific object. So for us to be able to do that, then we are going to call a specific method called book.refresh from DB on the object that we've updated using our F expression. So book attribute has no refresh DB, so it's going to be refresh from DB. And in this case, if we try to get the book page count, we shall now see that our updated page count is going to be 200. Now, the interesting thing is we've been able to do that without having to use book.pageCount, then minus the page count. And that is one way in which you can easily access database field values without having to query the object and then accessing that value on the object. Let us look at another example. Now that we've looked at an example of how if expressions work, let me show you another example. So I've introduced another field, which is the price field, and this price field is one to help you access the price of a certain book. So do not worry about the values of this because I've populated them in the database already. So let's just go ahead and try to make complex queries for discounts that we may provide on this. So the first concept I'm going to introduce is the concept of annotations. Django provides the annotate methods on the query set that is useful as it allows you to create other fields on the objects that are not part of your database fields. So let's say we have a price field right here. We can also create a discounted price field, and that will be dependent on this price field that we have right here. Let's look at how we can be able to achieve that. So I'm going to go right here in my shell, and the first command I'm going to run is one to open up our shell. And once I've imported that, or once I've opened our shell, the next thing is going to be for us to import our book models. So from books.models, let us go ahead and access our book model. Once we've been able to access the book model, the next thing is going to be for us to import the F class, because that's what we're going to use to carry out these F expressions. So I'm going to go ahead and say from Django.db.models, we are going to access the F class. And once we've imported the F class, next thing is going to be for us to create a query that's going to return all our objects annotated with a discounted price depending on the price of a specific object. So for us to do that, we're going to go ahead and say books, and our books is going to be a query set. This is going to be from books.objects And in this case, note that we're going to call the annotate method, because that's what we need to go ahead and annotate that discounted price field. So I'm going to go to a new line, and in this case I'll say discounted price. So our discounted price is going to be equal to what we shall get by using our annotation. So in this case, we are going to create an F expression to access the price of an individual book object, and then from that we shall basically subtract 15%, because that's the discount we want to give on these books. So for us to achieve that, we shall say 0.0, or it's actually going to be 0.15 multiplied by the price of that specific book. So mind the fact that I'm using an F expression to access the price of a certain field without having to basically call that object. And this is the beauty about F expressions. You are just having an F expression, you provide the attribute on that object, and then you're able to get that object. So I'm going to wrap everything within brackets, just like you see right here, and then we shall close what we have here. So the brackets are 1, 2, 3, 4, so I have to add another bracket to close the entire thing. So I think I've made a mistake. I've called our query books. So let me go ahead and repeat this and remove the S right here. Let me also go ahead and remove that. So if I go back and fix this, we're now going to have our books, which is going to return all books within our query set. Now, the interesting thing is each of these books is going to be returned with another field that does not belong to the model, and that is the discounted price field. So if we try to access the first book, we shall basically access it with books 0, because this is sort of like a list of books, and return the first book. So if we try to access book 0's price, that's going to be $11. If we try to access the price that's discounted, in this case, we are going to get the discounted price, and that is going to be what we calculate using this annotation right here. So basically, this is how it works. If we wanted to go ahead and do that for the second book, then we shall have provide index number 1, and the discounted price is going to be like that. Same thing for book number 2, and that will be the discount. So that's how we can use annotations to add extra fields that are going to hold information that we calculate based on other fields. I hope you've understood this example. Before I end this video, I'd like to talk about Pycon Uganda. Pycon Uganda is Uganda's developer event that is focused towards Python programmers. So if you use Python in your day-to-day work, whether you're a data scientist, web developer, if you do some scientific computing that is using Python, then this event is for you. If you want an opportunity for you to network, make connections, and also get to learn from people who use Python in the real world, then this is a very good chance for you to do that. If you want to book yourself a ticket, I'm going to leave the link to the official website of Pycon, and I hope to see you there. In this video, we've looked at some of the advanced features when using the Django ORM. We've looked at basic queries and how we can customize them to our needs using things like F expressions, Q objects, and so on. I hope you've enjoyed and learned from this video. If you're new to this channel, my request is you click the subscribe button so that you can subscribe to my channel and be able to see the variety of the videos I have on the Django web framework topic. And if you've liked this video, please leave a like. It helps me by pushing these videos in the algorithm. I hope to see you in another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.